Okay, so being honest with you guys, I thought that when Kyle McCord transferred over to Syracuse, that he would sort of have a bad season, the orange would be terrible, and he would sort of fade away into irrelevance. Well, I could not have been more wrong. I never made my opinion public, but yeah, I did not think Kyle McCord would actually be really good this season. This morning, I decided to go around looking at different college football scores, standings, and stats, and I saw that Kyle McCord is actually having a pretty crazy season, and is actually helping Syracuse football have one of their better starts in recent memory. So how did Kyle McCord save his career? How did he go from a guy who was run out of town at Ohio State to then putting up monster stats at Syracuse in just a half season so far? In today's video, we're going to talk about that. We're going to go back in time and talk about how Kyle McCord became a 5-star, how he became the starter for Ohio State, and also how he has saved his career over at Syracuse. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Kyle McCord. Football ran in his family tree, as his dad played for Rutgers back in the day, and he would pass that on to his son Kyle, who naturally loved the quarterback spot. One day he had his moment as a child, as during halftime of a Temple football game, he got to run onto the field as an 8-year-old and apparently threw a touchdown pass. The crowd would roar, and this was the moment when McCord was supposed to be a future superstar. His mom said, quote, "It was the cutest thing ever. He thought he was going to the Super Bowl, and for him it was serious business. From that point on throughout his whole life, he didn't want to miss practice, even when he was sick." Him and his older brother Cole would end up playing football and practice almost every day, and Kyle would quickly get scouts' attention due to his work ethic. His mom remembers that Kyle would wake up at 4:30 a.m. and started working out as a 13-year-old. He was 3 years away from getting his driver's license, so his mom would actually have to take him there. Eventually, McCord showed an extreme interest in playing quarterback, and his dad would become his first coach. He would teach him footwork and work on different concepts, and eventually he knew his son had a lot of potential. His brother noticed this pretty early on, as he said, quote, "I definitely noticed my dad wasn't coaching other kids as hard as he was on Kyle. From a young age, my dad was in his ear, telling him what it took to be a quarterback." In 6th grade, Kyle would start to become a bigger deal, as he would beat out an 8th grader for the starting quarterback job, and at the time his dad made him a promise. He promised Kyle if he could earn a Division I scholarship, that he would buy him a car. This would happen a short period later, as in the summer before McCord's 8th grade year, he ended up getting a Central Michigan offer. Looks like he got his car pretty early on. When it came time to picking a high school, he went across the Delaware River and decided to go to St. Joseph's. They had returned a quarterback from a state championship team, but Kyle did not back down. As a sophomore, he'd end up becoming the starter and exploded with over 2,800 yards with 38 touchdowns. In April of his sophomore year, he was starting to become an even bigger deal, but he was also starting to stagnate. Former Super Bowl MVP Phil Simms decided to reach out to him, and both him and his son would work with Kyle. They wanted to expand his athleticism and put more power into his throws. Simms said, quote, "The main thing he needed was to become a better athlete at the position. Physically he was maturing, but he was lacking some of the flexibility and mobility that a modern-day quarterback needs. After all of that, he'd become even more explosive on the field and in his recruitment. As a junior, he'd throw for a school record 2,800 yards with 38 touchdowns and a state championship. After that, he was recruited by nearly every school in the country and was considered a 5-star player. He eventually decided to pick Ohio State over 20 other offers. On his first visit to OSU, he'd spend a ton of time with both Ryan Day and Mike Yurcich, and then he came to the spring game and decided to commit after that. While this was a big get for Ohio State, it was sort of a big blow to the local school, Penn State. Kyle said, quote, "I think if you live in Pennsylvania, Penn State is the school everybody dreams of going to. They are probably my number 2 choice, but when Coach Day gave me the green light to commit, there was no doubt this was the place to be." His pledge was definitely huge to the Buckeyes, and it also helped them get a package deal, as Marvin Harrison Jr. would also commit. At the time, Harrison Jr. was a big deal, but he was not as hyped up as he is now. After Marvin Harrison Jr. committed, the two of them talked about playing together in the future. He said, quote, "It's cool to think 2 years from now we could be in the same position." Despite his 5-star status, McCord only had 20 offers, which is sort of low, and that's because he committed to the Buckeyes in April of 2019, 2 years before the class ended. As a 3-year starter there, McCord was a superstar. He led the Hawks to 3 straight state titles and finished with 6,800 yards and 88 touchdown passes. Both of those are city and league records. Coming out of high school, he was given comparisons to Matthew Stafford and was projected as a future second-round pick. 24/7 sports analyst Brian Don had this to say, Quote, he's a multi-year starter at a top 15 program and projects to be an early draft pick. According to 24/7 Sports, McCord was a 5-star recruit, the number 6 quarterback, and the 28th best player in the class of 2021. So how would Kyle end up doing at Ohio State? Well, let's take a look. McCord would arrive at Ohio State with a ton of fanfare, and he was considered the first true Plan A quarterback under Ryan Day. He was not a transfer, and he was always supposed to be the future. In 2021, he would end up being the backup quarterback to CJ Stroud, and McCord would see action in 5 total games. He'd end up throwing for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns against Akron, and then in 2022, he would take on a much larger role. This time, he'd end up appearing in 7 games and threw for 1 touchdown. Now at 2 years under his belt, he'd be thrown into a quarterback battle with Devin Brown. Devin Brown was a late rising quarterback in the class of 2022, and some were questioning how this was even a quarterback battle. Was McCord just not good enough? Was Brown that good? No one really knew. But eventually, Coach Day decided to make a decision and said that both would be starting. He said, quote, I think that Kyle has done a great job showing consistency, but Devin has also shown he deserves to play. So expect both of them to play, and we have confidence in both of them. While McCord may not have impressed as much as many thought, he had a good supporting cast to help him out. He had All-American wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. and wide receivers Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, and tight end Cade Stover. He'd end up making his first career start against Indiana, and he didn't exactly impress. He threw for 239 yards without a touchdown and an interception. In weeks 2 and week 3, he would end up delivering, as he threw for nearly 600 yards and 6 touchdowns, but this came against Western Kentucky and Youngstown State. The big moment for him was going to be against number 9 Notre Dame. On the road in a game that I was personally at, McCord showed poise, led them down the field, and they ended up beating the number 9 Irish 17-14. His 240 yards were great, but he didn't have a touchdown. He showed leadership capabilities, but he was just not producing. After that, he'd have a breakout performance against Maryland, as he threw for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in that win, and then after that, he would start to go off a little bit. He threw for 3 scores on the road against Purdue, threw for nearly 300 yards in a win over number 7 Penn State, and then had 2 more touchdowns and a road victory over Wisconsin. He was finally starting to find his footing, and he would finish the year strong. He had 3 touchdowns against Rutgers, 3 touchdowns against Michigan State, and then 2 touchdowns against Minnesota. While McCord was steadily improving over those 11 games, he still hadn't had one of those monster performances. Many were hoping it would come against number 3 Michigan, but that was wishful thinking. In the biggest regular season game of the 2023 season, McCord was a mixed bag. While he did throw for nearly 300 yards and 2 touchdowns against a really good Michigan defense, he also had 2 interceptions, one of which was unbelievably costly. McCord had a chance to lead them down the field and win, but unfortunately he made that bad decision, threw that pick, and they lost. This was now the 3rd straight loss to Michigan, and the fan base was not happy with him. In total, he threw for over 3,000 yards with 24 touchdowns and 6 picks. He ended up leading them to an 11-1 record, and the only loss came in that finale game to Michigan. He would thank both the coaching staff and the Buckeyes fan base, and he would decide to end up going to Syracuse. He said, quote, I decided to enter the transfer portal and explore other opportunities. I'm thankful for my time at Ohio State, and playing in the Scarlet and Gray was truly an honor. While this did stir some people up, it was okay to his team. McCord gave his heart and soul to Ohio State this past season, and it's not like he was that bad. He literally only had 6 interceptions, and was steadily improving throughout the rest of the year. The bar set by Haskins, Fields, and Stroud was so ridiculously high, pretty much no one was going to be able to live up to it. Luckily, the bar at Syracuse was a little bit lower. Yes, they had some good players like Eric Dungy, Tommy DeVito, and most recently Garrett Schrader, but the Syracuse Orange are not exactly as high level as Ohio State when it comes to quarterbacking. Going into the 2024 season, McCord was seen as a quarterback probably in the bottom half of the ACC. Some thought he'd be tremendous, while others thought he would be terrible. I thought he was going to be below average and end up leading Syracuse to a 3-9 record or something. Instead, McCord has done the opposite. In week 1 against Ohio, he ended up throwing for 354 yards with 4 touchdowns and an interception. Okay, he had a good first game. In week 2, they hosted number 23 Georgia Tech, and in a thrilling game where they won 31-28, McCord threw for 381 yards and 4 touchdowns, and this time did not have an interception. Through his first 2 games, McCord was really solid. In week 3, they played against Stanford, and in this game they ended up losing 26-24, and McCord struggled a little bit, but he still threw for over 339 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he had those 2 interceptions. From there, people were kind of forgetting about Syracuse, and they thought they'd become irrelevant, but in the last 3 weeks, McCord has really taken his play to the next level. Against Holy Cross, he threw for 385 yards and 4 touchdowns, and then he beat his second top 25 team of the year as number 25 UNLV fell in the Carrier Dome 44-41 in OT. McCord attempted 63 passes in that game and ended up throwing for 355 yards and 3 touchdowns. This past weekend, he walked into NC State, led them to a victory, and threw for 346 yards and 2 scores. So far, through 6 games, Kyle McCord's passed for 2,160 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, with 1 more rushing score against Stanford. McCord's completed 66% of his passes, for the most part has taken care of the ball, and has led Syracuse to a 5-1 record so far. No one really expected that in year 1 for Fran Brown, and I definitely did not expect Kyle McCord to be near the top statistically of college football. How close is he to the top? Well, let's actually take a look at ESPN's stats. McCord is actually 3rd in the country in passing yards with 2,160, and is also tied for 3rd in touchdowns as he has 19. By all standards, Kyle McCord is a star this year, and nobody's really talking about him. The guy was at one point deemed not good enough to start at Ohio State anymore, and has since taken off at Syracuse and has really saved his career. I know Ohio State just lost to Oregon, but Will Howard made that dumb decision at the end of the game, and while I think Will Howard is really good, at the end of the day, will he be much better than Kyle McCord is? That I don't really know. I'm not even going to try to speculate or answer that question, but to me, Kyle McCord has proved me wrong, and I think has proved college football wrong. He wasn't just some bust, he wasn't just some one-year disappointment at Ohio State, he is in fact a 5-star quarterback who's leading Syracuse to a tremendous season and could find his way back into the NFL draft discussion if he continues at this pace. McCord is a great player, his story was awesome, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did though, be sure to let me know your thoughts down below, leave a like if you didn't support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.